Hi, in today's episode, we have Anupama. Anupama is an ever evolving person deeply interested in human sexual behavior. She has vastly researched alternative sexual lifestyles and has also written a series of nonfiction books on the subject with a pseudonym. She believes in transforming the outlook towards sexuality by structured quality conversations, like we are doing one now, one at a time. Apart from this space, she works as a content specialist, a researcher, writes poetry, and once you hear her, you know that she sings very well. To me, I think that we live in a society where even now, sexuality is just justified only for reproduction of, the species ahead. It's not meant to be enjoyed. So, Anupama, you will have to tell me, considering this is the kind of narrative that all of us have been fed, that, you get married and then you have children, and only then, you're allowed to enjoy something that God has created for us. How and when did your entire journey, your inward journey to get into the space begin?
Hi, and thanks for having me here. And to answer your question, I think, like everybody else, when I started menstruating, that's the first time I became conscious that I have a part of the body which has never been discussed before. And within my own body, I feel something which is not what I feel on the other parts of my body. So now, in retrospect, I can understand that it was probably arousal. It was something similar to what boys would have as a hard on. But at that point, there was nobody to talk to about it. And there wasn't even a term for what I felt. It was like you bleed every month and it's something dirty. It's something not to be talked. So while this was not sexual in nature, this was physical in nature. I think that's where the first set of questions of why do I feel the way I feel started. But for the longest time, like everybody else, I was supposed to be a good girl. I was not supposed to masturbate. I was caught once, and then I was told it's a dirty thing to do. Good children, good girls, uh,
Absolutely.
good people don't do that.
Hmm.
And yet, I was like, oh, but you don't talk to me the same way when I go and shit and when I clean myself up, right? So that whole shame and that whole taboo and that whole stigma attached to pleasure. I'm not even talking about sex and sexuality right now. I'm simply talking of a sensation within your body. So it's not something that we discuss. It came back to surface. It resurfaced for me when I moved to Delhi in 2006, I guess. Six,
Where
seven,
were you
yes.
before that?
I was born and brought up in a small city in Rajasthan.
Okay.
And traditional household, middle class family, convent education, so all sorts of middle class morality attached with it, um, self image issues, and how good kids are supposed to be and good girls are supposed to be. And if you're talented on top of that, then you're expected to be overly good. So that means you've got an extra pressure to fit into the norm.
To
So
perform.
when I first came to Delhi, I think that was the first time I started and I was living in a hostel with other girls, and I realized that different people are doing different things, which I maybe can't fully make sense of. This included simple things also. This included things like eating meat. This included things like smoking, drinking, and for me that was a cultural shock. And a part of that cultural shock was also sexuality. In the process, I discovered a few religious sects because I was trying to find my space, but my body would rebel because you're 22 now and you feel a certain way and there's no explanation that's been officially given despite being a biology student. So even so here's the funny thing, right? As a biology student, you're expected to understand reproduction.
Absolutely. We
You're
all used to
taught a
draw
one line
that.
definition of coitus, but you're
Yeah.
not really uh, taught the psychology of it. You're not really given the space. I'm not even saying taught, I'm saying you're not given the space to uh, discuss the connection between body, sensation, and emotions. There's no space to discuss the combination of the three. But when you're all by yourself and you decide that it's time to go around and date, then you also discover that other people have different experiences than you do. So one of my colleagues at that point, and she didn't know that my relationship with someone was long distance relationship. So she said, maybe you should watch porn. And that's the first time I watched porn. That was the first time I sat in a cyber cafe and sat in like that tiny little cubicle in a corner. You remember those box sized cubicles which we would sort of
Absolutely. Yeah.
partially shut. And I watched a porn movie and I got scandalized and I shut it and I said, okay, this is not for me. And oh my God, what is this? And I came back home. Over time, over due course, I discovered erotica. I discovered the literary consumption. Like I started consuming the literary version of descriptions of sex. And I ended up discovering good quality erotica. And in the process, also discovering what could things mean and what would actions imply apart from just reproduction. And
Okay.
gradually, I got exposed to the whole queer community, alternative fringe lifestyles, polyamory, BDSM, whatever else that whole spectrum of sexuality and pleasure is. But when I look back today, I think it was already, maybe it wasn't late for me personally, but I think 22 is too late to discover your body. If the legal age for getting married is 18, then I think the right age to talk about pleasure should also be before that. So yeah, so that's how my journey started and then gradually evolved.
So now that you tell me that you began at the age of 22, which even in a normal Indian society is like people are so concerned about virginity, masturbation. You're told that you're going to have. I remember, I grew up in a very strict convent school, and we were told that these are evil things, and you will probably just die of some crazy disease if you even think about masturbation. You think about homosexuality, or you think about any of these things. So we were so straight jacket, it's people that we were never ever allowed to explore. We were always ashamed and shy of sexuality. So which meant that over the years, we never even expressed ourselves or even found the entire divinity of this whole connect between man and woman. It was mainly about it is only accepted if you are getting married and you're going to have children and your parents have chosen a partner for you. And invariably, if your parents have chosen a partner, it is not love. It is obviously you've married them because of the same social status or the same culture. And a healthy woman and a healthy man will get married so that they produce the children of that family going ahead. And invariably what happens is that either the man doesn't fall in love or the woman doesn't fall in love. But mostly in India, it is the man who really goes out and then has concubines, mistresses, or girlfriends outside. And it's obviously never discussed, among people. And this whole shroud that we live under is such a hypocrisy that society has. So it would be very interesting to know about the work that you've done in the space of polyamory.
Well, there's only one thing where, like, the first thing where I want to begin is that all of this, in all of this, one thing that we rule out is that monogamy and marriage, for that matter, is a social and a legal construct. Probably at
Absolutely.
some point in past, it was started because we needed to figure out who is the father of a said child. And that must have happened because we wanted to transfer property. We wanted to figure out who do I give my land to or who do I give my cattle to. And and in that sense, if you look at it, marriage in itself is a very, very patriarchal structure. It's not a gender neutral structure because the property is mostly transferred from the father to the offspring. Now, over time, sure, that's changing, but that's where I think it must have started. But then that also means that if that's not the natural construct, then probably polygamy, polygyny, polyandry, polyamory is what is natural for the body.
My goodness, that was quite a few words. Please repeat that once again, Anupama, for me. Polyandry, polyamory, and
Polygyny. I'll get into that. Like
all right,
I'll try and get only into the essential jargon so that we
all
sort
right,
of
okay.
um so so what I'm saying is that the ability to love multiple people, which is polyamory, must have been the natural desire. We also experience in the animal world, for that matter. Researchers have proven that there are a lot of animal species which are by default polyamorous. They have multiple partners, a different partner every season, or maybe multiple partners in the same season. So, so if we look at it biologically, I think polyamory or multiples in case of animals, sexual relationships, in case of human beings, because we like to believe that we have evolved and so we call it amorous or loving relationships, the desire to have multiple partners is something very natural. Now, add to that desire the fact that you are supposed to now fit into a social structure. And because the structure is patriarchal in nature, because the property is coming from the father, so polygyny, which is one man marrying multiple women, is still acceptable, but polyandry isn't. Because the only way you can control a woman is by controlling her sexuality. So you control the sexuality, you ensure that she doesn't go to anybody else, and the 9 months that she's pregnant, she's entirely dependent on the man. And well, there we are. There we go judging women for we we're busy slut shaming them, we're busy calling them out for having sexual desires, we're busy calling them out for even wanting to talk to other men for that matter. That's one bit of the problem. So I started off as a monogamous person just like everybody else because I was conditioned. Up, you're a good girl, you're supposed to get married, and there is going to be this one person who your family is going to choose for you, or you are going to choose for yourself and take the approval of your family, and then you're going to surrender your whole self to them. We don't teach people that marriage is a partnership. We don't teach people that marriage is also a relationship. It's not just a legal framework, it's also two people. We are so busy in filling up the marriage as a combination of two families and it's a union of two societies and all that, fancy paraphernalia to it. And so when I first came across a partner who was parallelly seeing someone, I was shocked because this was not something that I was used to. This was not something that I was told was right. And I broke up.
So it was your partner.
It was the guy that I was dating at that
All
point.
right. Okay.
And then the next default state was I'm not going to date anybody because men are all douchebags. They want mistresses and they want
Men are
multiple
all
girls. And
douchebags. So people who are listening to this podcast, both Anupama and me repeat again, that's what we thought. Okay. But they're not.
that's what we thought, right?
Yeah.
But they're not. And then I started hanging around with queer friends. So I don't identify as queer, but I identify as an ally. And when I saw people having to be in multiple relationships for different reasons, so there was this gay friend who was willing to marry a woman so that the family could be pacified. And he wanted to marry a lesbian woman so that both of them could have an extramarital relationship. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry, I need to wrap my head around this.
My goodness, repeat that again. This is amazing. This is this gay man. He wanted to pacify his family. So he decided to get married to his friend. And
He
his friend.
hoped to find a friend who would be willing to marry him despite being a lesbian so that they could both
Okay.
have their relationships outside the wedlock. And at the same time, the family would be happy with the pretense that, a guy
All
and a
is
girl
well.
are married. All is well. And I was struggling to wrap my head around it. I was like, I'm sorry, but can I please take some time to process this? How does this even work? Also, what happened was my first exposure to alternative sexualities, which is specifically, so to say, BDSM and polyamory, was with Westerners. It was not with Indian people, and it was online. So I felt safe because online was like physically, you're not in my proximity. You can't come and meet me. You can't do anything about my address. You can't stalk me. You can't harass me. At the best, what you can do is you can probably stalk me online on a few portals and I can block your ID.
Okay.
So, because it felt safe, it also allowed me a lot of scope to discuss. And unlike what I've observed a lot in the Indian community, Westerners were genuinely at that point interested in discussing about stuff rather than just fantasy role playing. So, this was not sexting that was happening, this was serious discussion that was
Conversations.
happening. Yeah, these were conversations like you and I are having, like after 15 years of my beginning of the exploration today. So they answered a lot of my questions.
And what were the questions at that time, Anupama?
So my questions would be like, okay, so can I, so what if I want to be a virgin even in a marriage? And then they would explain to me gradually how asexuality played out. And I was like, but why can't I feel myself attracted to men if I'm not in love with them. And that's how I discovered demisexuality. That's how I discovered, okay, so why does she hang around a lot with that girl? And what is this happening when they're role playing? And that's when I got to realize, oh, okay, so queer, and then the whole queer theory. And then they would deep dive into it. And then they would ask you to read references. They would give you links that you could refer. Like it was, in a
It
way,
was very
it was,
academic.
no, it wasn't academic. It was actually very community driven.
Okay.
So the links that they gave me were not really research papers or anything. They were people's stories, they were people's lives, they were people's blogs, where people were
Okay.
talking from their lived experiences. And when you listen to lived experiences, you know that there is some level of authenticity to it, even if it may be anecdotal. It
Hmm.
may not have a data point where you might say, okay, 95% people are cishet. That's just a random example I'm using. I don't like, I'm not using it as a standard data point. But I'm saying that this is not a data point, and these are people that you're engaging with. And when you engage with people, you at some level also gain the confidence of making your own choices, even if those choices may not fit into the normal framework.
But it must have been so difficult, Anupama, to even delve into all of this. I mean, hats off to you to be able to find your voice. So tell me, were people who you spoke to on the internet, did you ever connect with any one of them one on one?
From the Westerners, no. There was this one friend from the UK. I don't think he's alive anymore. He'd told his social security worker to let me know if he passed away, and I'm assuming he did. But that was years ago. But at some point later, I discovered that there was a community in India as well. There were online platforms where I could find Indian groups. And so I explored and I realized that, unlike what I wanted to believe, not all Indians are douches and not all men are douchebags. So, so with those people, yes, eventually over time, I discovered a lot of them. I met a lot of them. I was welcomed into their homes, their lives, their families. And I realized that just because you connected on a platform related to sexuality, it doesn't make you a different human being. You still have the same kind of human interactions. You still have same friendships. The only difference is um that you can talk about stuff that you can't possibly talk about with other people.
So you've stayed with in their homes where they've explored their sexuality and you've been part of the entire process, Anupama?
In some cases, I've been part of the process. In most cases, I haven't been part of the
So
process
share with
because
me some maybe one uh, incident or any one thing for the listeners to really understand that if anybody's interested really into getting into this space of sexual awareness, which I think is really the need of the hour, and so if they were to go in and do this, what is it that would be the comeback, the takeaway, and what did it do to you, Anupama?
so the first thing that you need to understand about sexuality is that there is no going back. Once you've discovered yourself, whatever that discovery is, it's only a journey forward. Like you can't see things and then unsee them. You can't discover things and then undiscover them. You can choose to forget them. You can choose to ignore them. You can choose to not indulge in them, but you can't unsee them. That's one. Two, just because someone may be interested in discussing sexuality with you, just because someone may be very open to talk about it or even discuss their personal bedroom experiences, doesn't necessarily mean that they are interested in you. Because a lot of times, what happens and what I've observed in the last 15 years in the Indian communities is that when we meet on a platform, we by default assume that everybody out there is to play, which is not the case.
What do you mean by play?
So play could be anything. For normal people, play could be just sex, and for BDSM people, play could be a session where they would experiment with pain or with humiliation or with power dynamics or whatever their trip is, whatever their kinks are for that matter. But one still needs to remember that beyond our sexualities, we are still human beings, and we all have our shortcomings. We all have our triggers. We all have our traumas, and we all also have our strengths and the things that we bring to table and the kind of qualities that we have and compassion or lack of it or whatever else. So So, one thing that I really strongly recommend to anybody who wants to enter into the space of sexual discovery and experimentation is please don't assume. Don't assume anything about yourself, about your partner, about your potential partner, about anybody that you're communicating with. Please do not assume. And the second thing that I want to emphasize on is consent. Even for a conversation like you and I are having right now, consent is of supreme importance, which basically means that if you were to ask me a question which I was very uncomfortable answering on a show, I would say that to you. And unless I feel that kind of safe space, it'll be very difficult for me to connect with someone sexually. Because as it is, we are judged. We are constantly judged for wanting to hook up. We are constantly judged for wanting to date multiple people. We are constantly judged for like I know people who are being judged for being on Tinder, despite
Yes.
the fact that my entire generation uses Tinder. Like 2 generations prior to me and 2 generations younger than me are probably using Tinder. And yet there is so much judgment about it.
And what
So
exactly would be the judgment? I mean, I'm a little blind on that spot.
so
So,
if it's a woman, she's a slut. If it's a man, oh, he's a womanizer. And my whole question to my question about it is okay, so she enjoys pleasure and so she wants to experience it differently with different people. And so where's the problem? Okay, he enjoys pleasure and he wants to experience it with different women or men or whatever their sexual orientations are. And as long as nobody is being raped, as long as nobody's consent is being violated, as long as nobody's marriage is being impacted, as long as everybody is truthful to each other. And I mention marriage only because it's an existing contract. If they're both single, well, then that is no longer a thing to be discussed. But if there is one party that is married, and you cause an impact on your partner without them knowing, then there's a problem. So there's this whole
yes, that's
element of
very dishonest.
yeah, so there's this whole element of ethical polyamory where everybody involved, and I mean literally everybody, is aware. The dynamics might be different. Some people might say, I don't want to know who you're sleeping with as long as I know that, as long as you don't bring them home. Some people might say, I want to know who you're sleeping with, but I don't want to meet them. So that, and I want to know so that I can avoid them in social settings. Some other couples might say, I want to know them and I also want to be friends with them because I think sharing my partner with someone is great because that means my partner gets taken care of better. Very few people are able to get past their conditioning and insecurities. That's true, but well then there are people. So even for me, for instance, it wasn't like a overnight flip from monogamy to polyamory. The stages were okay, I'm monogamous to uh, okay, I don't mind if my partner goes around with someone as long as he doesn't bring them home and as long as I'm the most important person in their life, to okay, maybe I don't mind knowing them as a friend. Now I'm at a point where I'm like, listen, you have a life which you've been living for X number of years before I came to your life. I have a life which I've been living. I don't see the reason to change it for you. You shouldn't have a reason to change it for me as long as we know our boundaries. So from I want to be the only person in your life, it's gradually moved on to let's have boundaries, let's discuss what we want, let's discuss what is not negotiable. And and once you reach that point with someone, I think what unfolds is very, very beautiful because it's not laced with insecurities, it's not laced with proprietorship, it's not laced with oh my god, now I have so many duties to fulfill. It's laced with I am evolving, so are you, and let's contribute to each other.
The whole question, is about this whole word that you used, insecurity. So because I'm I'm a monogamous person, and I find it frightening to even think that somebody who I am in love with, I have to share that person. I haven't yet reached that space. It's a very, very it's a beautiful thought to know that you probably have multiple experiences with multiple people, but I haven't yet reached that. It's not yet for me. But so when you talk about insecurity also in polyamory, that is a little clouded for me. So if you are so open, because sexuality is such a strong energy between two people, I've always believed that. And what differentiates us from animals is this, that animals have sex to produce their species. human beings have the ability to also love. And love is so divine, according to me. I mean, when you see a sunset, or you have a cup of coffee, or you're going to eat something or cook something, you miss that person you love, you know. And so I would like you to throw a little bit of light on this aspect of insecurity in polyamory. I think it will be fantastic for me to understand this from you.
See, an insecurity in polyamory is not any different from the insecurities in monogamy. The insecurities are still the same. Will he be with me? Will he still love me? Does he still love me? Does she still love me? Am I still attractive? Do I still earn enough? Am I able to keep her happy? Am I good enough? I think the fundamental insecurity always in any relationship, mono or poly, is am I good enough? Now, monogamous people hide it because they don't have to address it because there's no
Oh,
out and
yeah,
out
it's
second,
totally buried. Yeah.
right? With
Hmm.
polyamorous people, the only difference is because I know that my partner will have multiple partners or that my partner supposedly knows that I will have multiple people. We bring it out, we put it on the table and we discuss. So, one thing that really sustains polyamory, which ideally should also sustain monogamy, is conversations and communication. But even before that, there was something that you said and it struck out to me was, which was that, I can't imagine sharing my partner with someone and I haven't reached that stage. And that's absolutely okay too. Just because my set of experiences are around polyamory doesn't necessarily mean that they are the only valid set of experiences. My parents are very happily monogamous, so after a successful 40 years, almost 40 years of married life. And and I don't see a pretense there. Maybe there is at a subconscious level, maybe there are things that they say and there are things that they do to each other which they may not mean. But on the surface of it, in the functionality of it, in observation of it, it's a happy married life. Do I have any reason to say, oh my God, they don't know what they're missing out on? No. And similar. So one thing that I want to say to monogamous people who are listening to us is that you're not missing out on anything.
I'm sure quite a few people will think that they are missing out, because the more people I talk to about marriage, and it is amazing, this whole pandemic has played out so crazily in everybody's life. Marriages have broken, the divorces have gone up because two people are suddenly stuck behind four walls, and they have to face each other, which they did not do earlier. They come to terms with their own sexual energy with each other, with their emotional compatibility with each other, the roles that women play, the role the man plays. And my goodness, and the more, and I also feel it's amazing, this whole, of course, at one level, there's so much of grief with the pandemic, and at another level there's such an awakening also, among people, because I think the dialogue, the conversation today is getting lot more honest than what it used to be. And it's an amazing change that we're seeing, right now. So, coming back to, I think when you talk about monogamous people who are married, I don't know, after a few years, and once the wife has had a child, and this whole, the whole gender kind of just completely shifts, because the entire responsibility generally, mostly, is with the woman, and her body changes, and her sexual drive changes, and then invariably the men, uh, not too much changes in their physical or their emotional self, and then obviously they go out and they hide from their partners and they go and meet other women. And so polyamory, it's scary to me, but I do believe that there would be so many listeners right now who would really wish that they could open up and tell their partners, instead of hiding and saying that, no, you know what, I want to also meet someone else, because I think we both are very boring in bed together. So, there's such an underlying truth there, Anupama, that people do want to explore, but they don't have the guts. Because, when I look back at my own life, I think my mother always said this to me: oh my God, that girl is talking to boys. She has such a bad character. And this whole character assassination that they feed you with, that you are, I mean, in my head, I think in the initial years, when I, before I turned a teen, and then of course I became rebellious, but I was always, in my own head, I thought that I would appear slutty even if I spoke to a guy. And so obviously you completely, suppress your sexual energy, and it comes out in different forms in your in the later years, because I do believe it's one of the strongest energies that a human being has. And God is just, if there is something called God or divinity, I believe that we've been gifted with this exchange of energy, Anupama. So yes, when you say, for my listeners, that that it's okay to be monogamous, I think quite a few of them would want to be polygamous. And polyandry is something that really interests me. I think the entire shift of gender conversation will change, and I don't think that will happen till I live. But I would really like you to tell me a little, maybe and share an incident of somebody who came and shared their trauma with you, because there's so many times you can't express things that you would want. And how did you talk to them or help them show, the path forward?
So there were two things. One, I'll quickly take an example and sort of share how polyamory can be better processed, especially for those who want to experience polyamory, whether they're a man or a woman. So think of it like you have a basic cuisine that you really like, your ghar ka khana, your dal chawal with maybe aloo bhaja or something.
Aloo
And
bhaja, yes.
and then there is this occasional biryani that you want. And then there's also the coffee that you want. And then there's also a dessert that you want. So think of it like there is a primary compatibility that you have with someone, what you call as energy exchange. Now, I personally, I don't come from, like, I systematically choose to not associate sexual energy or sexuality with the whole God element, so to say, for the simple reason that it then brings in a lot of connotations from our religious conditioning. The minute we say God, or the minute I say divinity, there is a certain way I perceive it in. And the minute I start looking at that perception, the whole judgment and denial and taboo and purity and chastity and all those conversations start coming in. So the way I simplify is to not look at that religious angle and simply say that this is an energy exchange, just like intellectual exchange, which I'm having with you right now, just like probably a sensual exchange that some of our listeners might be listening to two women talk about sexuality, and it might be playing in their heads, and you know it that it's possible, and I know it that it's possible, and it's okay, right? So the important thing is acceptance, and which brings me to the question that you asked. Trauma is not unique to sexuality, but trauma can manifest in sexuality, and trauma can be of multiple kinds. It doesn't necessarily have to be rape or abuse or uh, violence. It can. It doesn't even have to be very strong sense of body shaming. It can be something as simple as the fact that when you were being raised, you were always made to wear long skirts, and so
Absolutely.
subconsciously you were receiving the message that there's something to hide. There's something to hide. It shouldn't be shown. There is something to hide. There's something wrong with this which I can't show. And then we wonder why our lower parts of the body don't function, why our root chakra is not activated, if you want to look at it spiritually. Or for that matter, why do I have to turn off the light every time I want to have sex?
I think that's
So,
more to do about the fact that, we are so shameful of our bodies, and we have this whole image of advertising that is like really thrown on our faces. I think mostly women want the lights switched off in the bedroom more than men are quite comfortable with their nudity.
but that's also because women are the ones who've had to live to the extremely over exacting standards of beauty as it was perceived by
A
men
man,
selling
yeah,
products, right?
absolutely.
So the gender shift that you spoke about in terms of polyandry, I think that's where the whole healing for most women lies. For most men, that is where learning lies. Because if you don't learn it,
Please
you are eventually
repeat that again, Anupama. Oh my God,
women
these
reclaim.
were golden lines. For women, polyandry is where the healing lies, and polyamory is for the men. Where? Learning
No, and
lies.
polyandry is
Sorry.
also where the learning for men lies. So basically,
Wow.
polyamory is where learning for everybody and healing and acceptance for everybody lies. Let me put it this way. So suppose I have three different partners, one that I live with, one that I raised my children with. Suppose I'm not married, I don't have children for the record, but let's assume. And then there is this one that I meet maybe once a month because he stays in a different city and he travels. Here is the thing, the one that I meet once a month doesn't judge me for the kind of mother that I am. He's fine with whatever kind of mother I may be, as long as I'm not abusive towards children because children come first. But then that again is my value system. So for by my value system, if he doesn't judge me to be the mother that I am, I'm good with that level of acceptance. The one that I raise my children with doesn't judge me for whether I'm fat or whether I'm tall or whether I'm short, whether I'm bald. Because for him, what's important is what kind of a mother I am. That's a different level of acceptance. The one that I live with has a different kind of acceptance for me in the sense that he is capable of tolerating my day to day tantrums, PMSs, mood swings, and I am able to bear his. And I don't see a reason why either of them should be competing with each other. They're looking at different facets of one person, and there is no competition. Think of it like so, one of the things that really can help people, both men and women, wrap their hands around polyamory is an analogy of the IIM score. So when you take an exam like CAT or GMAT, there is an overall cutoff that you have to score, and there is a sectional cutoff you must clear. Think of it like that. You may be great at data analytics, but you may not be that great at verbal ability, and it's all right. And you need somebody to accept. You just need to find a college that will accept you for whatever verbal ability you have. Right. So your primary partner or whoever you want to spend your life has to be that person who cuts off the overall and who also cuts off all the sectionals. And please don't expect miracles. Nobody's perfect. Like at the end of the day, the reason why people are attracted to polyamory is because nobody is perfect. If we were all perfect, we would all also be equally suffocating to each other.
Absolutely. As they say, variety is the spice to life, you know?
Even the spice element for that matter is more like a temptation. So I wouldn't even call it spice. I would just simply say variety is a necessity. Like you can't eat the same dal and the same chawal every single day, thrice a day. So it's not really a spice. It's actually a necessity.
Yeah, we just don't want to accept it. Yes.
We've been conditioned to not accept it because it's convenient. It's convenient to condition people to go for easy things. See, polyamory is always going to be difficult. There are
Why?
more people in the equation, so there are more conversations. Everybody has to be comfortable. Then there are going to be competitions for time. There's going to be always a debate for who gets to spend which day of the week with whom. Oh my god, मुझे आज तुम्हारे साथ मूवी के लिए जाना है. I want to go to a movie with you. At the same time, your other partner might have a medical emergency. Who takes precedence? Some of it can be solved by common sense. Some of it cannot be because people can get jealous. People can get insecure. People can be needy. People can have different requirements in the relationship.
And how does one maneuver that?
Communication is how one maneuvers that. You talk and you talk like there's nothing like over communication. I've been told a few times that, oh, you don't have to over communicate. I don't think there's anything like over communication.
Oh, there's never, ever anything called over communication. Absolutely.
Right. So the more you communicate, and I think there it helps to have a structure to communication in the sense of before communicating to your partner, you also need to sit down and figure out for yourself what are those three things that you would just not compromise on. What are those five things that you must have in a relationship? I'm just using three and five as random numbers, whatever your list is. And then there'll be areas which you'll be okay making adjustments, so to say. Adjust kar lo thoda. So there'll be things that you may be willing to adjust, and there will be things which you may not be willing to adjust. And that's how you set your boundaries. Also, uh, one of the really good tools for communication is what we call as the safe words. So,
Okay.
say um, you and I are in a relationship hypothetically, and you are constantly doing something that triggers me. it may or may not be related to you. It could also be something that brings up a past trauma, but it's not a bad behavior, so to say.
Okay.
So, what we do is there are two ways of saying it. One is that I say, can you please stop doing this? Why don't you stop doing this? You always do this. This really irritates me. So, this is a very
Normal
attacking
behavior.
slash accusatory,
Yes, it is.
right, way of
Yeah.
saying it, but which
Mm,
is also the most common way of saying it because
absolutely.
that's what we
Yeah.
see.
Mm.
The alternative is for me to say, hey, yellow or red or green. Green is everything's great. Please keep doing what you're doing. Yellow is there is something that I want to talk to you about. You want to slow down. And red is okay, you've triggered me to a point that this needs to stop. Whatever that this is, that this could be sex, that this could be cooking together, that this could be demanding time from each other, that this could be a conversation for that matter. But what it does, what these safe words do is they take out the personal sting. They take out that I am being blamed and attacked feeling. They leave you with, okay, there's a problem, there's a situation that we need to address, but they don't leave you with, I did something wrong. And that really leads to a relationship getting more grounded and more solidified in its root.
This is amazing. I think this has been one of my most favorite podcast interview, Anupama, in a really, really long time. I am in admiration and I am honored to have you today on my podcast. I think what you're doing is not what everybody can do. And I still remember our meeting in Delhi, in that cafe. And I remember hugging you and leaving that day when we spoke to each other. March on, Tigress. And I hope to have you in another episode to explain to our listeners about BDSM and kink, because it's not something I too am completely in the know how. And I look forward to more conversations with you, Anupama. Thank you so very much for being on this podcast. And as my um, partner who does the entire sound in the recording, and when I told him that we are going to do polyamory, he said it's one of the best things in which you can share rent.
That,
So
that is such a cute and a practical way of looking
it's
at it.
such a cute
That's
and a
true.
practical way. So I just burst out laughing when Roshan said this to me, that I think it's one of the best ways that one can share rent, and he says that with a straight face. And thank you very much. And if we were to get in touch with you, where can we find you, Anupama?
Do you want to share it with your listeners
Yes,
or
with my listeners, if there's somebody who would like to talk to you, who would like your guidance, who would like to know where are the polyamory society, or if there's in any way they would like their lives to become a lot more lighter because they cannot express to another friend or, to their partners, if they were to understand a little bit more about themselves, can they get in touch with you? Do you have a site on which you write? Do you have an Instagram handle where they can follow you? Do you have anything of that sort that you could
so
share?
I'm most active on my Facebook profile.
Okay.
No, but before that, I need to say something to you. It was a sheer pleasure to actually be with you today because just as strongly as you remember our Delhi meeting, so do I. And when you said you wanted to do a podcast and you wanted to sort of talk about polyamory, I was like, finally, I get to speak with her. I get to talk with her. So it's been a sheer pleasure. And for your listeners, where they can get in touch with me is the best way to get in touch with me is my Facebook. All right. So for Facebook, they have to look for Anupama Garg. For Insta, they will be looking at sorry, give me like a moment.
Yeah, sure. So, hey, whoever's listening, they know how to get in touch with Anupama. And she's more than beautiful to me. And I can never ever forget that afternoon that we met. And she's one of the most amazing souls ever and a gift into your life. So, Anupama, have you found your Instagram handle to share with our
Yes.
listeners?
So
Yes.
so you need to go to Instagram and you need to look for Anupama Anupama dot Garg dot 25. And for Facebook, you will need to look for anu.25.25.
fantastic. So here we have. And thank you once again, Anupama, for being on this podcast today. Look forward to meeting you soon in Delhi once this whole pandemic is over and we need to sit down and catch up.
Yes, it's time.
Yes. Lots of love. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you to you. And I hope that whoever's listened to us or whoever will be listening to us do find their sexual energy and sexual pleasures and they can reclaim their power.
Absolutely.
I realize that it's difficult, but you're not alone in the journey and you can do it.
Yes, it's about reclaiming your own power that God has given you. Okay, I won't use the word God, that you
That's
have
all
been
right.
born with. I'm so sorry. That you were
I mean,
born
it's a show and I'm absolutely democratic that way. So, yeah.
So thank you once again.